But I do kind of want to talk about a few things. I've got a presentation I kind of want to go through, but it's really designed to be open-ended. If you get really bored, I'll kind of look at your faces, and if you're scratching with your middle finger at me, I'll see it and I'll keep going. But I really wanted to kind of give you some background on what we're doing, why we're doing it. Chad, Chris, Chad, you guys all back me up or say, no, he's off his rocker. Won't be the first time I've heard it. But I kind of want to go through some of the things that we're talking about. So if I can find it here, I'm going to try to share everything here. Oops, dadgummit. Instead of the present, I hit the share. So you guys should see the overview, if that's correct.
We see it, Mark.
All right, so I just kind of wanted to talk about, of course, our SWOT team developed back in May, and our delivery date is in November, which seems really quick. I hate to say the pandemic has been good for this team because, like everything else in 2020, it's just completely different. Subgroups have been meeting very often. Subgroup A, I'll get into the groups here in a little bit, but we've actually been meeting every week. Every Friday we get together, we talk about a few things for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's been quite a few discussions, there's been a few debates, there's been a couple of arguments, and that's kind of good. The only consensus that we've really come up with is that there is going to be no consensus. But the biggest thing that we're running into is there's years of institutional culture that are there, and we're wanting to change what we don't directly control. And our first subgroup discussion really came into, well, if we can just get SPC to do X, Y, Z, and well, if they would just do X, Y, Z, and in reality, we can only control what we can control, and that's going to be at the WFO level. So a decision was made pretty early to really focus on what we can do and not necessarily what we can't do, and we'll get into some of that here in a little bit. So improvements to the outlook, warning, post-warning operation phases, and we're supposed to do this in 6 months. Or as I looked at it, the system doesn't work, but don't break anything else while you're trying to fix it. So I'm not sure if I'm Patrick or SpongeBob there, but basically that's kind of how the charter feels. So some of the things that we really want to talk about is we're coming up with recommendations. And our team really is going to try to get into documenting why the recommendations are there, spell them out, include the strengths, the limitations, and then if people on the team don't quite agree with it, they're going to have a chance to kind of be like the Supreme Court and say, okay, here's the differing opinion here. Because we are going to have to go to the RLO with this and SRH to kind of come back with some possible actions. So how we're doing this is doing with 3 subgroups. All of them have some sort of NUICO representation, and so far the conversations have all been quite positive. So we've got 3 groups that's doing the outlook in the post-event phase, one that's doing a warning phase, and specific topics for Group C. If you'll kind of notice here, Group A is mainly former WCMs or WCMs right now. And as my former SUE over in Fort Worth told me, these are the guys that just hang around waiting for the pamphlets to be handed out. So we're kind of talking outlook phase, post-warning phase, best practices for tornado emergencies, and some other things. Then subgroup B is really the warning phase. This is where it's really going to come in with the meat of what we should be training on, what we should be looking for when there's a radar signature out there. What's the best staffing model to have so you do have a good person on radar who's been well trained, knows what they're looking for and why, and making sure everybody else is trained up and all sorts of good stuff. And training and preparation actually is a big theme all across, as we truly find there's no one true standard as far as severe weather and especially tornado training. as it goes all the way across the region. Yeah, San Juan and Albuquerque probably need a slightly different flavor, but at the same time, we all need to be training with a purpose and doing stuff for a reason, and that's really where it's coming into. The Smith et al. Paper from back in 2015 has got some very good things in there, and we're already talking about how to get a lot of good information out of that, whether it's going to be like a one-pager, such as what Chad's done in the Jackson area. There's some websites out there that we'd like to make a little bit more operational, especially for training purposes. And there's also some things out there that we'd just like to get into the hands of operational decision makers when they're at the radar, where they're staring down something, to make sure that they know what they're looking for, they know why they're looking for X, Y, and Z, and making sure we're communicating X, Y, and Z the way we're supposed to. And the other thing that Group C is doing is the coordination on the SPC on those little micro MDs. I'm going to have a hard time really fighting my disgust on those micro MDs, which kind of tells you where I fall on the spectrum on those. One of the recommendations is to do away with them as they have been done, where you're doing a little sub-county level. Here's where the tornado is, and here's what rating we'd give it. There's some usefulness to that, but we really need to change how that is being communicated out. So that was kind of the how. I know it's a little bit boring, and I know a couple of you are trying to fall asleep on me. That's fine. But where we are now in the movie is where we are now. So, always like to have coffee when I'm looking at radar, and where we're now is still in progress. We're still in subgroups, really hammering out all sorts of several issues. Right now, we've got 13 quote-unquote findings and recommendations. Most of these recommendations so far have got some good agreement within subgroups. And even though the subgroups are kind of talking back and forth, we are going to give the chance for the other groups to have the final say. And if we can't convince the other subgroup of why we're doing what we're doing, it probably isn't going to make it into the final report as well. So that's kind of where we are now. So we're not quite halfway there, but we're pretty close to being there. So we're going to continue to work mainly in subgroups through about mid-September, and then the full group is going to meet more often late September through October and into November to try to finalize the report and really submit to SRH in November. And we're really going to try to get those recommendations as well as any kind of opposing viewpoint, because I forget which one of you guys talked about it earlier. We've been talking about this for a while. What works for us here in Amarillo may not work for you folks in Birmingham. It may not, but I want to give the RLO and SRH, here's what we think, here's why we think it. By the way, here's some issues that we're going to go along with it. But really what's going to come out of this is going to be a very heavy emphasis on training and a very heavy emphasis on the collaboration factor in SPC, because one of you said it earlier. I don't know if it was, I forget who, but you said the WFO SPC collaboration is broken and they're not listening to us. Brian, I think it was you. They are listening to us, and it is very clear that even though the SPC watch collaboration is looked at as a model, the WFO to SPC collaboration is broken, and it has to change fundamentally. However, this is not going to be an easy process. WFOs are really trying to attempt to collaborate the message with SPC. It has to be science-based. And Kevin, you mentioned earlier, some forecasters just don't know how to do that, which sounds really weird, but some forecasters really don't know how to do that. And I agree with you 100%. We have our own issues here. There's also some fundamental misunderstandings, misconceptions about what goes into each other's decisions and what impacts those decisions makes. For example, you guys in Alabama, moderate risk means what?
We have school systems that'll shut down with a moderate risk.
Absolutely, and that's just an automatic. So is there extra collaboration that needs to go into that? Probably. Does SPC realize that, maybe if they're on the fence, and should this be an enhanced or a moderate? You know, so that's one of the reasons why that survey kind of went out. We wanted to see where everybody was, and there's a lot of different decisions out there about DSS, what triggers an email briefing, what triggers a video briefing, what triggers X, Y, and Z that maybe SPC doesn't realize. And I can tell you right away, SPC was blown away when we told them, oh yeah, well, this office has this and that office does this if there's a moderate risk out. And we talked about some certain aspects with Bill Bunting, certain days rather, and where he said, actually, if we had known that, we were so on the fence, we would have leaned one way. And that's also something that really led us into something that came out of the Tennessee Tornado AAR that basically said, hey, we're not being listened to. And SPC does want to listen, but I think it was Kim that brought up the fact that, yeah, sometimes there's some frustration going on because, actually it was Kevin, sometimes we're trying to make our case in a way that's really scientifically weird. I don't really know how to say that better. So they are listening at the point, but really the graphical collaboration tools, something better is necessary. We did also find out through our survey and through some other conversations within the offices of the folks that are on the team, they didn't realize that once SPC put out their preliminary graphic, they thought there was still time to collaborate. Oh, I don't like that. Let's not do that. At the point that they put out that preliminary graphic, it's too late. That is the decision that's going to be made because that is the solution to the problem of that 1630 update going out and really getting blindsided by what it is. And that, I'm going to come back to this question as well, but the sound of silence really needs clarification. I'm sure that's clear as mud, right? What that means is if you see SPC's day one outlook when you come in on a day shift, 7, 8, whenever it is you guys come in, and you look at it, if you say nothing to SPC, does that mean you agree with it, or it means you're okay with whatever they do? And there is a big swath of differences of how each office operates with the sound of silence. I know in a lot of offices that sound of silence, if you're not reaching out to them, that means you agree that outlook should not change. There are some others that say, well, no, I want to make sure I'm going to put my word in, and then whatever comes out at 1630 or that update later on, we really need to be on the same page on what that sound of silence truly means. Yeah, we've got to reach out to SPC. It's kind of on us as WFOs to really say, okay, I think it's going to be an X type of day, slight, moderate, enhanced, whatever the case may be, based on this. The dry line is going to be here. Upper level trough is going to come across at this time. We think storms are going to be numerous. We think they're going to be out there, or there's going to be one, but it's going to be a doozy if it happens. All that's going to go into SPC's collaboration. And sometimes it's the slower days that are a lot easier to collaborate. Just like weather, you can have a lot of days, like here in Amarillo, nice day, sunshine. I would say freakishly hot, but our dew point is in the 50s, so I'm not going to complain to you guys. It's easy to reach out to our neighboring offices on a day where we've got a lot of popcorn storms coming up and maybe some stronger ones coming in later on. Those are the days where the collaboration actually decreases, where it actually should increase, ideally. So the sound of silence really needs to be clarified on both sides of the collaboration, but either way, it is bleeping broken. Another thing that we found through Dr. Laura Myers and the Center for Advanced Public Safety, actually looks like the day 2 outlook may be the most important collaboration window, which is a good thing because it really comes at a good time. I know for the central time zone, it's right there around noon, 1 o'clock, where you've got the collaboration window for the day 2. Little more troublesome maybe in the eastern time zone. But what she found in some of her research after going through some outbreaks, and Chad, you may want to talk about this a little bit more in Tremont, but what she did was went around and talked to a bunch of people that got affected by some tornadoes. And she asked the question, at what day do you have the most confident in the severe weather outlook? Was it 5 days? Was it no days? Was it 2 days? 1 days? Now, this graph is terrible because it makes it look like day 2 and 1, there's absolutely no confidence. So I redid it. Basically, this is what it really should look like. Those people that got hit by some severe storms, and some emergency managers in there and some other folks, I don't know the end number. I can't truly justify the research here, but I do trust the researcher. So what they found was the no confidence was pretty low. 5 days out, 4 days out, pretty low confidence. So just more of a heads up is really good. But once you get into about 3 days, 2 days, and then 1 day, it actually takes a little bit of a dip. I mean, we're only talking about 4 or 5% here, but that day 2 becomes the first draft of the day 1. So that day 2 collaboration window really looks to be the best opening window into what SPC is going to be doing for tomorrow on day 1. So what we're truly finding out is if we want to get our voice being heard collectively and as a region and hopefully all across for the WFOs, that day 2 collaboration is actually a little bit more important than day 1. So that's going to be one of the big takeaways from the report as well. So that day 2 collaboration, that's going to be a focus point. And then on day 1, what we're truly finding as well is we should be going away from, okay, here's where the slight risk is. Here's where the enhanced risk is. Here's where the marginal is. Just ignore it. If you want to put up a model, a graphic up of what that is, great. But really the messaging should be, here's your preparedness, here's your timing, and here's your expected impacts. Now, I'm a little biased on this. I spent a lot of time in Dallas-Fort Worth. And what you guys wrote, or whoever wrote it for the Tennessee After Action Review tornadoes, really resonated with me because all of the F3s or F4s that I have surveyed as a WCM in Dallas-Fort Worth pretty much all came on slight risk days. It's not the outlook name that's important. From a WFO standpoint, we really have to go from beyond, here's where the risk is, here's where the risk is, here's where the risk is, to here's where we think things are going to start out. By 3 o'clock, we think they're going to be roughly in here. And here's what we need you to do. It's tomorrow, so we want you to prepare. Make sure you've looked over your plan. Make sure your weather radio batteries are good. Make sure you've got yourself some sort of plan for tomorrow as it comes through, and really comes into day 1. So less focus on the day 1. Here's what the risk area is called, and here's where the border of that risk area is. Unfortunately, this goes to longstanding culture. What are WFO forecasters really good at? Coming up with, okay, here's X risk, here's Y risk, and here's Z risk. We're really good at that. But we're not really good at, okay, by 3 o'clock, we think it's going to be here. By 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock, we think it's going to be over here. And by the way, here's what we want you to do based on this information. So there's a fundamental shift there that's easy, yet hard as hell. So there's all sorts of things that kind of go into this. And another preliminary recommendation is going to be this this chart, to go the bleep away. I know that's probably going to be very controversial to some. Notice there's only one picture of a tornado. So tornadoes only occur over here, but slight risk just means a couple of trees down. Oh yeah, most of the F3s, F4s that I've surveyed occurred in slight risk. The Tennessee tornado earlier this year was in a marginal, I think it was, marginal to a slight. So one of our recommendations is to not use this. And we're also working on another version of this with some folks at SPC to come up with a better way to represent this and some other messaging options out there. And the post-event preliminary findings, actually we're finding what you guys were talking about a while ago, some of the training with Jim Ledoux and some others. It really needs to come out as well, because Parks and a bunch of other folks are redoing the DAT. There's some new opportunities to train in this as well. And one thing that we truly found within our subgroup, which subgroup A, which is mainly pamphlet givers, those WCMs, didn't realize what was required from an F2. Do you guys know what's required from an EF2 in the DAT? If there's an EF2 in your CWA, you have to draw polygons. Not a whole lot of people realize this. In fact, about half of our pamphlet givers kind of did I didn't know that. Yeah, so we've got to get some more DAT training. There's also some satellite training or satellite data ingest processes that are not very well understood. And there's a lot that can be done in the DAT that we've only really scratched the surface and really coming back into. And as far as the event, we do have relative consensus to incorporate this method all paper into regional and local training plans. Still some, I don't want to say debate, it's just some logistics on how we're going to do this. You know, there's a website out there that, Dave, again, I shared the presentation with you. If you want to download that, you can get the links as well to get these links to kind of work that you can kind of train through. You can see what damage assessment or damage potential there is going to be using some of these. It really comes into the WES, into training, into a little bit more than just trying to go out and say, okay, here's the radar data, what's my reports, what's going on, how do we communicate that? You know, what should the tag be when we get X? And what should the tag be if it's X plus 5, or whatever the case may be. So there's some logistics that we still have to work through, and trying to kind of discuss about regional standards. I sometimes envy you guys, especially in Alabama and Tennessee, where you have these things called trees. We had an AF1 tornado on Sunday, and it pretty much hit the one power pole that it could have hit within about a 900 square mile area. It's a pretty rural county. So trees are one thing to kind of come in. So, you know, how are we talking about those things? Regional standards are going to be difficult, which is why we're kind of embracing going to have consensus, but we're not really going to have consensus. So we're about halfway done. The easy part is nearly done. The hard part is going to come back in and try to write the report with recommendations that at least a majority of the team members can approve of, and then spell out the reasons for and against, and then give it to SRH, give it to the RLC, and to come up with a plan forward for the region, and hopefully get SPC more involved with talks. We keep talking with them more and more. They are listening, but they are digging in at the same time. So we are continuing the process, and we'll continue the progress all the way through to November to try to come up with whatever we can come up with as far as recommendations and move forward as a region. So basically we're about halfway there, and since we're halfway there, there's Bon Jovi Lizard that gives you the lizard on a chair. My daughter found that one, so I had to input that in there.